I'm going like way back for this one. I'm talking 20 years back to probably one of my favorite, I'm going to say, science fiction horror films from the 90s. 1995 Screamers. This is a film that I hold very dear to me. It was a film that I remember from back in the VHS and video store days. I remember getting it from the video store that I lived around the block from. From looking into it now, it's kind of disheartening to see that, for a film that cost so much, didn't really make a lot of money when it was out there. It doesn't have the greatest of reviews. But however, I'm just going to go ahead and say, don't listen to any of that. I will be the biggest advocate for this film, for a film that's basically below par to a lot of things. It didn't meet its budget at all, and it's got really bad reviews. This is totally well worth a revisit for anybody who thought it was really bad at that point in time, but it's totally worth a watch now. It gives so much more to, I want to say, maybe even this generation. I might actually even make a completely separate video on this film, but this is totally a film that I would love to highlight in this channel as well, simply because I love this film. Screamers is such a unique story. It's based on a Philip K. Dick's a story by him. I think it's a short story, which I also didn't realize until much later on in my life. And if you don't know who Philip K. Dick, he's the guy that wrote Blade Runner, which the original book name for Blade Runner is Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. So he's big in the sci-fi world, and he was big on writing science fiction. So what is Screamers? Screamers takes place in sort of this post-apocalyptic future, but it's still futuristic to the extent that it doesn't actually take place on Earth. It takes place on another planet that isn't even part of like our solar system from how it describes. It's just called like Sirius B or something. And what it's about these people who are sort of miners and soldiers, and they're trying to like survive while there are these machines that are out there that are, hunting them down. And the machines are, it's sort of like, Terminator-esque, really hitting the notes with, people with technophobia and whatnot. It's sort of playing off of this idea that the 90s had, where the future was meant to be so bleak, and a lot of that had to do with technology. Now, granted, we have a lot of movies that tell that story now, which is why I think during this era, this would be even scarier, because robots are even more of a real thing to a lot of us these days. So they have these robots that are sort of, they're hunting them down. Now, after they have the standard kind of version of themselves that hunts people down, the robots have now sort of evolved to create what is essentially called a screamer, which a screamer robot looks like a person. And that's how they're able to kind of infiltrate like people's home bases and break into strongholds and murder more humans. And what happens is there's a certain general who's played by Peter Weller. Now, Peter Weller, for those who don't know, are disengaged with how big 80s and 90s films were, especially when it came to Peter Weller. That's the guy who played RoboCop in the first two RoboCop films. So he plays the main general. He takes another soldier with him. They're meant to go deep into the radioactive wasteland, where they're meant to find an answer to like sort of a way to escape, a way to get off world, because they don't have essentially any ships, but they've heard of a place that has a ship. So they have to go through radioactive land and hopefully avoid the Screamers. So as they're avoiding them, they come across another band of soldiers. They help them kind of work their way through. They get to a base. The base is completely ransacked. Nobody's there. They essentially believe everybody is dead. And he learns of the idea that there are 3 types of these Screamers, which essentially they only believed that there were 2 types. So he tries to find out what the other type is. Lo and behold, it turns out to be one of the soldiers, but it's a soldier he essentially fell in love with. And then that robot, I know it's getting a little crazy, but bear with me. That robot now understands human compassion and love, so it helps him escape by turning against another robot who's trying to kill it, and essentially Peter Weller goes and he escapes the planet Sirius. And it ends on a very interesting cliffhanger because the robots now, like, you don't know what could be a robot. And for some reason, I forget why, but he has a teddy bear in the cockpit with him. And then the movie ends with him flying off into space, and the teddy bear is like kind of off camera, but the teddy bear is moving. So you see the teddy bear moving, and then cut black screen credits. So it was meant to I think it was meant to have a sequel. It doesn't get one until almost 15 years later. I've never seen that because I've heard really bad things about it. Screamers Hunting, or The Hunted, I think it's called. It's from like 2009. It's got way worse reviews, and it's I think it's a direct to stream kind of thing. It is not worth it, to say the least, from what I've read. So I've never given it a chance 15 years after that film released. But I will always go back to Screamers. Screamers is just this film that it reminds me of a time when like science fiction was sort of at its peak. You know, when you're talking about it, I think the year that this is meant to take place in is like 2080. So the film takes place in 2080, and I'm sitting here realizing that I might actually see that year. And that's going to be a year that I'm going to highlight just as much as people were highlighting when the Back to the Future year finally came up, because we just passed that up. There was always this glimpse into the future, whether it was as bleak as like a horror film would do or as bright as a comedy would do. There was always this look into the future that I think 90s films did so much better than films that are doing it now. That's just my honest opinion. There's a certain sort of quality to what a 90s film brings to how it portrayed the future. Even if it wasn't a negative light, like in a horror movie like this one, there's still just so much there. Like, it showed you how their technology was and how close we are to that technology or how far away we are from that technology. It's just so interesting to see. And it's a good story. I really like Screamers. I like Screamers for what it is as a movie. This sort of, you know, I'm the human that's been tasked with escaping and trying to find a way off to get more help or whatever it is. That to me is a big deal. Like, there's also other soldiers and there's other bases, because you also still have to deal with other humans that may not 100% agree with you, because this essentially just became, quote unquote, another Earth. You know, and we're very close to even doing that, to even finding another planet that people could actually exist on. So it's the science fiction and the fantasy of it that I really love, and the horror stuff is sort of secondary to me, because I don't look at this film as scary. I'm telling you right now, the film isn't scary. You know, maybe it was a bit scarier back then. It's not really scary. It's more action orientated than it is scary, to me at least. You might find it scary, and the only reason I'm really talking about it is because it actually is labeled a sci-fi horror, but the sci-fi is where it really shines, not necessarily the horror. Maybe not 100% worth it if you're trying to do straight up scary stuff this year, but if you do like films in all of their 90s glory, and you've never seen this, definitely find a way to watch this. It's all 90s all the way.